37 Legislature in Guam is back from recess of its emergency session. Senator San Augustine, Acting Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, notwithstanding the House rules, I move to waive legislative session agendas item 15 and 16.
On the motion to waive those agenda items, which are legislative concurrence and consent calendar, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries. That brings us to the second reading file. We will begin with Bill number 29-37 COR. Senator Barnett, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to first thank my colleagues for their overwhelming support of this measure, Bill number 29-37 COR, which, well, the version here is as substituted and amended by the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture. Introduced by myself, Senator Chris Barnett, and co-sponsored by Senator Sabina Perez, Speaker Therese Terlahi, Senator Roy Kanata, Senator Will Parkinson, Senator Chris Duenas, Senator Tello Taitagui, Senator Frank Blas Jr., Senator Tom Fisher, Senator Joanne Brown, Senator Lujan, Vice Speaker Tina Rose Munya Barnes, and Senator Amanda Shelton. Regrettably, I would like to move it to the third reading file. Yes, please. Thank you.
Would you like to discuss it, Senator?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, I want to thank my colleagues for their overwhelming support of this measure, and I would just like to note, in the instance of my colleague, Senator Dwayne St. Nicholas, I apologize. I had sent the bill for co-sponsorship to the wrong phone number, and I'm hoping he can add his co-sponsorship here on the floor. But it's no secret, Madam Speaker and colleagues, that we're here in this emergency session because it is truly an emergency situation in our public schools. And I know that some of our colleagues had been asking the governor to declare a state of emergency for our public school system. But when I heard the State of the Island address right here in this session hall, and the governor put the responsibility for our public schools and their sad state squarely in the court of the legislature, I decided that it was then time to request this emergency session to hear not just this measure, but a couple other measures I believe that are going to greatly benefit our effort to once and for all put our schools in a better state. You know, we had a roundtable Friday night, a parent-teacher organization roundtable, and we heard over 5 hours of compelling testimony. Testimony from representatives from just about, I would say, every public school on the island. And I thought it was interesting that as each one testified, they would say things like, I thought our school was the only one that had this problem. And by the end of the night, it was very clear that almost every public school on this island is suffering from the same conditions. I would also note that the Department of Public Health and Social Services in testimony during this the public hearing for Bill 29-37, the Division of Environmental Health head, Mr. Tom Nadeau, had said that if the Department of Public Health were to inspect the schools in the district, that most, if not all, would fail to meet basic health and sanitation safety guidelines. And I felt like that was a real wake-up call. And what this bill does is really force the issue, because I think that the public, the students, the stakeholders know that, you know, we have given the Guam Department of Education and even the government of Guam, when they were responsible for the school system, years, decades to come correct. And I believe we're faced with a perfect storm of, you know, aging facilities, you know, lack of routine maintenance, also neglect, incompetence. And so what this bill does is it amends health and safety sanitation rule guidelines, which I would just go back to the public hearing testimony. Now, at the time these rules and regs were proffered, it was the year 2019, and We heard testimony during the public hearing for Bill 29-37 that the Guam Department of Education had initially wanted 20 years to come into compliance with these health and safety guidelines. Fortunately, the cooler heads opted for a period of 5 years. So these rules went into effect in 2019, and existing school facilities were given 5 years to come into compliance with them. Well, that 5 years is up at the start of the next school year. But I don't think that the people of Guam, the children of Guam, deserve to wait another day, quite frankly. And I think that was a big part of why so many of the colleagues here in the body signed on to co-sponsor this measure, even though it's been called drastic. But when it comes to saving our schools, I believe that drastic is exactly what we need to do. From rodent infestation at Simon Sanchez High School, which received a D rating, to prevalent structural issues and mold all over Southern High, which also received a D rating, to flea infestation at DL Perez, to awnings that aren't really awnings at all. We heard testimony from Juan Guerrero PTO that the one and only awning that's in front of where the kids get let out on the bus has been roped off with caution tape, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, not even for 3 years, 5 years. And so there are the students who are wheelchair bound, students who have disabilities are forced to walk in the rain through the mud when they get off the bus because our government has failed to act. And this same government is asking us to trust them, Madam Speaker. And I think that, I know my colleagues will agree, as indicated by their co-sponsorship of this measure, that doing it the same old way just isn't going to work. And so again, we heard testimony from so many of these PTOs talking about a lack of toilet tissue, dirty bathrooms, leaky faucets, air cons being down. And I don't think anyone would disagree. In fact, the governor in the state of the island, and even in her correspondence to this body in the recent days, also said that she feels like the schools are definitely in a situation that requires us to act. And that's exactly what this emergency session, these measures, and specifically this bill does. If the responsibility to save our schools falls squarely on the shoulders of Ihi Legislature and Guahan, and if the governor, again in her State of the Island address, has told the senators that we are to use excess funds to help save our schools, then in this emergency session, I believe that's exactly what we're doing. And I don't appreciate the political gamesmanship that's going on right now. We're trying to have this emergency session to address the sad state of our schools once and for all. I don't appreciate being pestered and bothered to address a measure that we have already committed to address. It is frustrating, ma'am, but again, there's the intent of this bill. Some people have said that this bill will shut down the schools, but I just want to be clear that this bill contains a mechanism for the Department of Public Health to grant a variance. We also heard testimony from Acting Superintendent Judy Wampat that she has a great plan in place, and I agree it is a great plan. And I think that plan is going to work greatly to come into compliance with this bill, should it become law, and I believe that, I hope and pray that it will. And I'm just going to read this section here, 4722. In the event that a school or an operator is unable to comply with certain requirements of these rules and regulations upon a showing a good cause, which is not the result of negligence or malfeasance, and if corrective action is in progress, the director may grant a variance from the requirements of a particular rule by making a written determination. So I believe that although some have called this bill drastic, and I do believe in many ways it is also reasonable that we're just asking the Department of Education leadership, even taking into consideration what many would call their dismal track record when it comes to keeping promises relative to facilities and maintenance, that we're just asking them to start these efforts, and in good faith, if these efforts are underway and in progress, a corrective action is being addressed, then they can get that variance and remain open. But what I'm not comfortable with is this idea that we have to allow our schools to remain open no matter what. That is an insult, not just to our students who, every election year hear the same old thing about education first, education first. It's also insulting to the parents and the teachers and the staff and the stakeholders, because we're basically telling them that we don't care. We don't care if the roof is falling down around their head. We don't care if students are coming to class and finding a live rat in a sticky trap. We don't care if students are getting bitten by fleas. We don't care if students who are wheelchair bound are getting rained on and being rolled through the mud to get to class. That for some reason allowing our kids to go to schools in these conditions is acceptable, when the Department of Education and its leadership over the years, I feel, should have, well, first of all, known about these conditions, and second of all, come up with a plan in the event that these schools were closed. All we heard during the public hearing was that in the event a school is closed, we're going to rush right back to online learning. And we did ask the acting superintendent to come up with something better, right? Because we do want learning to continue. They have said in testimony that shutting down the schools is disruptive. It's a disruption to learning. And while that may be true, I'm not a teacher. I think what's more disruptive to learning is continuing to show our school children day after day that we're comfortable with delivering these empty promises, that we don't believe they're good enough to fix the situations in the schools. And the thing about kids is, if you show them that you really believe in them, the sky is the limit. And there's so many bright spots in the Guam Department of Education. So many. But it's our responsibility, again, to paraphrase the governor, to make sure that these kids are going to school in a facility that, at the very least, we're not trying to be fancy. We're not trying to be fancy. We're just trying to do our part and to show these kids we believe in them. To let them go to school in a facility where they have working air conditioners, where we don't have to worry about what kind of mold they're inhaling, where the conditions of the school are good enough that if inspected, they wouldn't get a D rating. Because this idea that, we don't want public health to inspect the schools because they're all going to close down, I think the time for denial is over. And I just again want to commend my colleagues, because I feel like with this measure, we've all agreed that enough is enough. That was another piece of the testimony we had Friday night. When is enough enough? The acting superintendent in her testimony had asked for another year, but again, I don't think our kids and our teachers and our staff who work also in these conditions deserve to wait another day. And so I'm very grateful and humbled for the support of this measure, and I'm also very grateful that you granted the request for an emergency session. And I just again would ask for my colleagues' continued support of this measure. It's no secret I have skin in the game. Some have been critical because I have 3 children who attend the public school system, but this isn't about them. This is about every single child who calls the Guam Department of Education home, deserving our best effort. It shouldn't be a question of students getting a back seat because people need raises, right? People do need raises. We understand that, but I think the more pressing issue today is that we address these measures in front of us We've already committed. I know there's a lot of people watching, a lot of people in the general pay plan. We have committed to deal with these raises. But first things first. Let's first address the very important issue, the state of our schools. And I don't know really what else to say, Madam. I feel very confident in this measure. I'm, again, very grateful for your support. And I just ask that we, if there is debate or, any questions on this bill, that we do it expeditiously. Because this is an emergency session, ma'am. And I believe that these, not just this measure, but the other couple on the agenda here are going to, again, do great things to address the emergency state that our public school system is in, because I believe enough is enough. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the motion, on the bill, Senator Dueñas, you are recognized.
Jesus Wasi, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to rise on this very important motion in full support. Madam Speaker, once in a lifetime opportunity. Those were the words from our acting superintendent. When the several roundtables that we've had, she and her team were very gracious to come down to this legislature. And Madam Speaker, I kind of observed what you did. Of course, it was tough. Of course, there were tough questions. They had some answers for some and not necessarily answers for others. And I'm not going to take the time, Madam Speaker, to go over what our people of Guam already know by listing the numerous deficiencies and really what this bill calls for. Because, Madam Speaker, particularly with the way that the acting superintendent laid out that she has phases that she's ready to move on. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. And what Senator Barnett's really dealing with here, and most of the body, and I think that's why most of us or all of us signed on to it, was the things that were talked about in Tier 1 and Tier 2. The things like addressing the mold, the insects, the rats, the things that actually you and I and all of us expect of establishments that we patronize. We know that you're not going to fix every single door in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months. We know that you're not necessarily going to be able to construct major construction, maybe in that time, although we'll be hopeful. But we know what this calls for primarily is all hands on deck to make sure that those key safety issues are addressed. Safety and sanitation. Madam Speaker, I was old enough during the time to remember the time of Governor Adat and Lieutenant Governor Frank Blas when he was during his term, because my dad summoned me quite a bit to help on what they called happy labor. And we would oftentimes, not just during the summer, but even during breaks during the year, do what we could to pitch in and help out with the schools. But Madam Speaker, during their term, there was one time, and you might remember this, I'm sure Senator Frank does, that there was a start of a school year. And the teachers, and I believe it might have been led by some union folks and the like, the management had said, we're ready for schools, and they said, no, we're not. And I remember during that time, because many people that I know came to the rescue, those that worked for the government and public works and other areas. Governor Adat, Lou Pangilinan, the chief of staff for Governor Adat, marshaled every single agency that had any capability to repair, to construct, to do whatever it took. Madam Speaker, I believe it was 72 hours where marshaling those resources from our government were done to the full satisfaction of all the faculty, staff, teachers, and everyone that ensured that could happen. Madam Speaker, that's not the only time. Many of us in this legislature and otherwise during summertime and the like have joined in that as well on an annual basis and even on an emergent basis. Many administrations have marshaled those resources, and that's why I'm concerned, Madam Speaker. And that's why I'm so glad we're in this special session, because I share Senator Barnett's disappointment in this very hallowed hall. When we were clearly given the clear lines of delineation, it is your responsibility, legislature. Look back to what has happened and where the responsibility lies to ensure that these schools are safe, sanitary, and ready to serve our children. And that's why we're here, Madam Speaker. We took that challenge. And I agree with Senator Burnett. The 3 bills that we have put forward are going to put us on the path to making sure that we accept that challenge, but that we also continue now. If we have to ask, we'll ask. I know many governors after that authority had shifted. They would still marshal the resources. As a matter of fact, there was an announcement over a week ago, Madam Speaker, that a whole of government effort was coming together. I don't know what happened. I haven't seen that plan yet. So it went from whole of government to whole of the legislature. So we're ready. But we're still going to ask. Because I know there's a lot of good people in the executive branch that, when asked, they'll step up. They'll do it on their own. They don't need orders to try to help. So, Madam Speaker, like I said, I'm not going to belabor the points with regard to going over all of the issues that we already know, but I'm going to celebrate today. Maybe for the next 45 seconds, because it looks like there's a motion for another session. Not surprised. But I'm going to relish the fact that we're here now doing what we're supposed to be doing. Pay raises will be entertained. I'm sure there'll be some discussion in terms of how to move that forward, but that's not what we're here for today. We're now doing our job as called for. And even with that change, Madam Speaker, in closing, the change was from the governor of Guam to the government of Guam. But I can't imagine any governor, the highest office in our land, would say, I am not the government of Guam. As a matter of fact, I think for 3 years of an emergency, we were made clear that we knew who the government of Guam was. So, Madam Speaker, absolutely, as one of my colleagues mentioned, the government of Guam, and I think the governor of Guam is the embodiment of the executive branch of the government of Guam with the largest amount of resources that can be marshaled under any circumstance, particularly an emergency circumstance. So I'm glad we're in this session, Madam Speaker, and I proudly am a co-sponsor and fully support Bill 2937, and I ask this body to pass it expeditiously. Jesus Masi, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the bill? Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I certainly rise in support of Bill 29. You know, we understand the Department of Education has many challenges, and certainly with regards to maintenance, having been around long enough, I've seen over the years the continued challenges they've had. I'm hoping through this process and wanting to assist them and help them along that we can finally address some of these critical issues that our students are faced with in the public school system, some that are repeated problems. But I think we all agree that these are not problems we want to continue to see in our school system. At best, we want our children to be well educated and have the opportunity. Ultimately, certainly for those of us that are parents, you want to see your children have a good opportunity for a good future, particularly when we're no longer here to help them, so that they will have that educational experience and be able to pursue opportunities and careers that will help them grow and hopefully in many ways contribute back to the community from which they've come. It's unfortunate, Madam Speaker, I don't think I can pass the opportunity but to see what has happened this afternoon when we're here wanting to support our children, which many, including the governor herself, when she ran for office once again, you remember all those campaign ads with smiles of holding up our children and promising all these wonderful things we want to support for them, but when the time comes, other priorities seem to be where the focus is. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the focus of where we're at. And it's unfortunate, Madam Speaker, because I don't know who's advising the governor, who the governor's advisors may be. I think they're falling short for her, unfortunately, and not putting her in a very good position to pin the whole issue of our children and wanting to ensure that they have a safe, clean environment to be educated in against the government of Guam employees. I think she's getting really bad advice. And the fact that she's listening to it, she's better than this. She really is, and it's unfortunate to see what has happened this afternoon to try to intercede, to not allow this special session that we have, this emergency session that's been called forth, to address several bills on the agenda, including this important one, this very first one, that will help improve the school environment. And I know there's many challenges facing the Department of Education, and I'm hopeful in this term, and certainly with the leadership of our good colleague, our new colleague, Senator Barnett, that we're going to spend a little more time going through these issues, because at the same time, we want to get to the root of the problem. We want to provide the support, we want to provide the funding, but we also want to ensure, because at the end of the day, it's not always just the money, we want to ensure that these resources that Department of Education is being entrusted with is being properly managed, so that we don't end up with these habitual problems. Because we ask the government to do many things, but are people always at the top of their list? Education's there, public safety's there. Of course, our health care and our well-being is at the top of the list. Being here today to address this bill is to prioritize that. And I saw, sitting through these meetings, and I appreciate the additional forums, it's nice to see the legislature back on the ball with regards to its responsibilities to have effective and efficient oversight in the government, particularly with the Department of Education. To see that these problems have existed for so long and continue to exist is unacceptable. And certainly when we had the parents and the parent-teacher organizations Friday, for those of you that attended that particular meeting, you can see the concern the parents have, particularly when they themselves have contributed and volunteered so much of their time, contributed their personal resources to want to ensure the safety of their children. And many of them feel that their concerns have not been facilitated to where they need to be to take effective action, so that these corrections that have been there for quite some time can be properly addressed. I think we need to stay on them. We need to stay on the administration of DOE to ensure that they properly address these issues so that there aren't any more reasons for excuses. I've been a product of the public school system. I spent 9 years in public school on Guam. Most of my education actually is homegrown. And I have to tell you, back then, I did not exist in those schools in adverse conditions, especially some of the ones that were brought up at Price Elementary School by the parents there. I went to Price. I went to Barragata Junior High School, and I thoroughly enjoyed my experience as a public school student. It's only when I spent 1 week at GW that my whole education direction changed. But Senator, my colleague had brought up Senator Duenas with regards to the contributions during the Ada Blas administration. I was very fortunate to be a part of that cabinet back in the time of, as we refer to the days of Tempun Ada Blas. I've been on the roof of Simon Sanchez High School back then when they had to address the repairs of the roof, because Governor Atta asked us all hands on deck. We have these problems. Be it your evening, your weekends, I need you to go out to the schools and address these issues. And sure enough, we did. And I'm sure everyone else probably since then has had to do that. And no problem, I mean, we've been there to help. But we also have to ensure that the Operations Department of Education address these issues and address them every day. Because there's no reason our children should be in classrooms that have mold or leaks or fleas, or not even being sure as a result of these meetings to hear that these sanitation permits are issued when no proper inspections have occurred. And granted, public health has limited resources. They've said they've orientated representatives from the Department of Education to properly note when issues of concern should be addressed, but that's not, why does that need to be necessary? We need to ensure proper sanitation inspections are occurring. I mean, that's what we expect when we go into a restaurant, even though now we're finding out we're probably lucky that restaurant's been inspected in the last 3 years. We want to ensure that our children are safe because we have thousands of children in the school system. We want to make sure when they eat their food that their food is clean and safe for them to eat, that the environment they're in is safe. Why should they have to worry about going to a safe bathroom, having basic things of hand soap, paper towels, toilet paper? Goodness, haven't we heard this story over and over and over and over and over? It's almost like the governor calling us into a special session over and over again. And I think the time has to stop. Maybe the government of Guam isn't able to do everything exceptionally well. But in this particular case, because our children are entrusted to us, we have a responsibility to make sure that these issues are being addressed. And yes, Department of Education, granted, they have the largest budget and continue to have the largest budget. And as I mentioned to the current acting superintendent, since her and I served here together, the budget of the Department of Education has tripled. Tripled. And yet, as she relayed to us, Department of Education is educating 10,000 less children today than they previously were. So those are the bigger and deeper issues I'm sure we need to get into. I'm sure under the current leadership of Senator Barnett, we will get into those issues, and I look forward to it, because I want to know what the root of the problem is. We know what the solutions are and what need to be addressed. Most basic to ensure our children have an adequate education. Yes, colleagues, I was there to vote for that too. A lot of these key milestones that we want to reference, yes, they happen in a time that previous legislatures had the foresight to put in place. These are very basic things. These are what we say are our priorities when we go out there on the campaign trail to our people. Our children are our future. Well, then we need to prioritize that. That's what we're doing here this afternoon. We're saying that this is the priority that we need to address. And I know in one of the other bills that we will discuss this afternoon, we're going to address the funding of that to make sure that the money's being spent where it needs to be spent. Because I think the time has come at some point, this should be unacceptable. We should be up in arms. We should be up in arms about these conditions and the fact that they've allowed to exist. And how and why? Where does the buck stop? You think it should stop at the principals because the principals are the ones there running the school? And the principals say, well, we keep putting our concerns to DOE Central. DOE Central doesn't respond. And then what does DOE Central say? What's their excuse? What's their answer? Well, I think when we provide the resources, then we have every right to expect an answer, because this is a job that these people have been tasked to do every single day. Ultimately, all of this is supposed to be in place to support the children, the teachers in the classroom that are teaching those children, and to make sure that those children are in a safe, clean, and productive environment. That's the most basic requirement that we should see. The fact that the Department of Education wants to stretch out another year, I think we're going to see the same thing. They're not going to address these issues to the last minute, and in some cases, not at all. One of the key things that jumped out at me when I read the public health report was the reference to apathy. That's very concerning, because I think, are we getting to the point that this has been this way for so long that we just don't even notice it anymore? That it's acceptable to walk into a restroom and not have operable sinks, as they say, that are covered with plastic. Have unsafe, unclean bathrooms. Gosh, that is not an environment any one of us would want to see. Certainly, if that happened here, I think we'd have something to say about it. On top of that, I'm sure we'd do something about it. Because heck, I've cleaned many a bathroom. We go home and clean our bathrooms fairly regularly. We need to make sure that's happening in our public school system to make sure that our children are safe. If we can address this issue, then my goodness, I think everything else we should be able to address. But this issue and the fact that it's existed for so long, that's the next level we need to get into, is why. Like my son always asks, that's the infamous $1 billion question about everything. Why? I hope we get to that this term, because you want to get to that level so we can move on to bigger and better things. And with that, Madam Speaker, I certainly stand in full support of this bill.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, is there anyone? Senator Parkinson, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, too, stand in support of this bill. However, I do have to say that I am a little bit surprised by some of the rhetoric in this chamber, because when I read this bill, the first thing I thought was this was a courageous bill by Senator Barnett to do what nobody had the courage to do, and that's move us on the path towards closing these schools that are unfit for our children. I believe that if we were to lower the due date to this summer, or even keep it till next year, that these schools will not be in compliance and will be forced to close. And talking to some of the folks over at GDOE, they had mentioned that in the next 10 years that they expect that we will have not enough students in some of these schools. So if that's the case, that we're not going to have enough students to fill these schools, then I believe that this bill that Senator Barnett has proffered to close schools might be, while radical, might be the right way to go. Close these schools that are unworthy of our children, and let's consolidate them and put our best resources and manpower behind the schools that can be salvaged. To be very clear, I want to be crystal clear with everybody in this body so that they go in with eyes wide open. This bill, whether it's this year or next year, will lead to school closures. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Our student population is dropping, and perhaps the most useful thing we can do to stretch our resources is to close schools and consolidate our students. So I'd like to commend Senator Barnett for the courage to proffer a bill that would close these schools and do what nobody before has ever had the courage to do, except kick the can down the road. So I stand in support of this resolution, and my only concern is if we do close these schools, we must talk to GDOE and we must have a proper plan to give these students a proper face-to-face education so that they are not disqualified from public assistance for higher education. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, Senator Taitakui, you are recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to be too long. I just want to stand in full support of this measure. I've been to all the public hearings, the roundtables, and I just want to commend especially the PTO, especially the parents of these students who are doing everything possible to try and make their children's school a safer place to go to, where they're there like 8 hours, 7 hours a day, all day long. I just want to commend them and thank them so much. Please don't give up. We're trying to do what we can do for you to help.
Point of order, Speaker.
So I thank you, Madam Speaker, that this bill is actually going to do what we should have done years ago. To hear about a child having to call their mother to come pick them up because they have to relieve themselves, that's crazy. That's ludicrous. How many of that happened throughout the year or at a particular school? because the student cannot relieve themselves. You know what happens when they hold that in? We all know what could happen when you hold that in. Then becomes a medical issue. Madam Speaker, we talk about, closing the schools. Well, didn't we just come through a pandemic when the schools were already closed and our kids were still learning online? We can still do that while repairing our schools. So I don't think this whole, theatrics of, we're going to shut down our schools, our kids are not going to learn anything. We've been through a whole situation where the school was shut down and the kids were learning online. And if it takes August, September, October to continue on to get these schools repaired, then they can do this online. There are ways around it, but there is no way around it when a child gets hurt because we were not responsible enough to put them in a place that was safe. Is that what we have to wait for? One of our children gets seriously hurt? I think there would be more of us here today if we had children in public school system right now. I think we only got one senator with a public school system, in the public school system. If there were more senators with children going to public school, all of us would be standing in support of this bill. All of us would continue to move forward, and all of us would support the money that is going to be needed to repair these schools. Again, I thank the PTO, I thank the parents for stepping up when we can't let them down. Not the parents and not our children. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support this measure, but with some reservation. I used to be a school counselor down at Southern High, and one of the first rooms they actually put me in was the tiles were falling from the roof every time it rained. I was kind of surprised from going from the airport, being a customs officer, and being put into a classroom where the roof was falling down. Went from working from the airport and clean environment to Southern High. My only reservation with this, and I support it, is that the undue or the timeline and the timeliness. I wouldn't want to impose something that, with limited time on something that you obviously needs time to get fixed. So just want to be a little bit cautious and just make sure that if we're going to do something, we're going to do it right. And although I see the need to address the school conditions, I wouldn't want to impose such a stringent timeline on the people that have to make the changes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the bill? Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand in support. I did respond to Senator Barnett's call for support of this. I'm surprised. We already talked about it, that I should have been on the list. But you know what? I like how my colleague talked about if you have kids. Some of you are still at the age where you should have kids in public school, or you could have kids in public school. If we want to talk about a little bit of history of the schools, I was on the Board of Education when schools were shut down. This is about maybe 12 years ago, 14 years ago. And what did we do on the board? We fired the superintendent for allowing the schools to fall apart. I'm surprised that as the years have gone by, schools have been falling apart, but nobody's addressed it. or nobody in DOE has addressed it to the body. When we want to talk about ensuring that the schools are safe for children, yes, I'm in full support of that. But I also like to make sure that my colleagues understand, or when we do get to the bill that talks about funding, there's a lot of money that DOE has. I only question them is that let's make sure they spend it. They do fix the schools or address where the money has been. Because it's been 3 years now. It's going to be 3 years. And we haven't seen any schools fixed yet. And that's the amazing part, because it was during the pandemic. When the schools weren't open, when the schools should have been fixed. And the only reservation I have for the author of the bill is that we shouldn't wait a day. We are waiting a day. We're waiting until the beginning of the school year. I believe that maybe the author would make the amendment that it goes in effect immediately so that the schools can start reporting the variance of getting it fixed. Not the excuse of we gotta wait until August or no. Tell us today, if this bill passes, of what you're gonna do for every school that could be closed. How are you gonna fix it? And what are the steps? Because there's 3 bills here today. One of them is gonna take care of the procurement part. But if they don't have a true plan, then it doesn't matter. We change it, school closes, we go through, what's that, the electronic learning? No biggie, we've done it during the pandemic. Not an issue. But we just got to be concerned is that they're true to what this bill does. You want to put a variance? Tell us exactly how you're going to do it. Show it. Put it in writing. Show us an RFP. Show us the funding that's going to cover it. Not the excuse of we got this Guam and nothing happens. And every one of us are sitting here saying, I thought this bill would fix it. I believe this bill could fix it, but I think we need to speed up the time. And maybe the author would agree with me on that one, and then we just move on. But I am in full support of changing this date, but I prefer to move it up. It'll actually put the dent on the heads of the people in charge. And if not, then we call upon the board to take the appropriate action. The board is a policy board. They hired the superintendent. They should have fixed it then. We got a new superintendent coming in. If they want to continue to be on the board, then take the appropriate action. Write the policy that fixes the schools, not make the excuse of why the delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the bill, any other senator would like to be recognized on the bill? Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Suze Masi, Madam Speaker. I rise in support, full support of this measure. And I think, what's happening in our school system requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. And I think Bill 29-37 is one of those very first measures that's really critical, because what this bill does, it speeds up the timeline. So otherwise, these regulations that were compiled and into the compilers or into our regulations had a delayed enactment of 2024, July 2024. And so what this bill would do, it would ensure that these regulations are apply a year earlier, roughly a year earlier, before the start of the school year. And just to kind of share with you what some of those regulations say, and it should be common sense, right? It says a school site should be free of potential pest breeding sites, such as open dumps, swamps, and should be located away from swampy areas. The school site should be kept clean, free of rubbish and overgrown vegetation. Exteriors of buildings, walkways, awnings, picnic tables, benches, and other outside structures shall be kept clean and in good repair. All storm drainage systems shall include a gutter, leader, downspout, splash block, drain opening. And all equipment, structures, and fixtures that are no longer being used shall be removed from the building and properly disposed. So this is just one of many requirements for a school to pass muster. And it's really, maybe it's not shocking, but after being a part of the PTO meeting on Friday, a lot of these things, a lot of the schools, a lot of the PTO members came and testified that many of these things were not happening in our schools. And I think every day that we do not ensure that our students are in a safe learning environment, we really put our students at risk of harm which could be avoided. And like my colleague said, what is it going to take for us to make sure that our students are safe? And we want to make sure that we can avoid any accidents. Luckily, students have been avoiding, and our teachers and the greater community have been really trying very hard to protect our students with the resources. But I think what this measure does, it's really a wake-up call that we really need to prioritize our schools and our community. Education should be number one. We are cultivating leaders of tomorrow. We're cultivating the people that we're going to depend upon in the future. We really need to prioritize this. And as a teacher, as a former teacher, I see now I have the opportunity to make changes and supporting this bill among many of the bills. And I thank the good sponsor for adding me as a co-sponsor, Suzuis Masi.
Suzuis Masi. On the bill, is there any other senator who'd like to be recognized on the bill?
Madam Speaker, I rise.
Senator Fisher, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. I rise to ask the senator who is the principal author of this bill a question.
Please state your question.
That question being referring to the body of the bill, referring specifically to Section 3, variance. Would the author explain the intent behind lines 10 through 16 of the bill? She's got to call you.
Which page, Senator?
That would be on the bill itself.
Yeah.
That would be page 3.
On page 3. And are you looking at the substituted and further amended version?
I believe I am. It's entitled Variance, 4224 Variance, and that designation begins on line 9 of page 3 of the bill.
That doesn't match with my version.
May I approach for the purpose of
Yes,
looking
we'll
at
take
your
a
version?
1-minute recess and make sure we have the correct version. 1-minute recess. We're back from recess. Senator Fisher, you had the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. With the chair's permission, I would like to amend the question that I would put to the senator.
Please state your question.
The question would be, ma'am, referring to page 3 of the bill, lines 14 through 20, under section 3, entitled variance. Would the senator explain the intent behind that paragraph?
Just a note, Senator, so the variance section also goes to page 4 as well on the top.
I've got it on page 3.
And page 4?
Well, yeah, it goes to page 4, but
Yes.
I'm only curious
Okay.
about.
All right, would the sponsor of the bill yield to this question?
Yes, the sponsor would, Madam Speaker, but just for clarification, could you ask the asker of the question again, which lines, because I didn't hear.
He was pointing to page 3 and the whole, but would you restate your question, please?
Yes, thank you, Speaker. I am referring and asking the gentleman about lines 15 through 20.
Thank you. May I?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Okay, line 15. Before a variance from a requirement of these rules is approved, the school or the operator shall submit a written statement of the proposed variance from the requirements citing the relevant rule section numbers. The written statement shall include an alternate plan to address the potential public health hazards and nuisances under the relevant rule section. So basically, Madam Speaker, the granting of the variance allows, considering it's good faith, and if corrective action is already in progress, then the Director of Public Health can grant a variance, which is in some ways a pass from complying with a certain rule, unless, if you read further down, that pass or variance will result in the closure or condemnation of a school. So the intent of this section was to give GDOE a little bit of breathing room on maybe some of the infractions that they couldn't come correct on immediately. But at the same time, it doesn't allow them to get a variance or a pass on an infraction of the rules and regulations that would result in the closure or condemnation of a school, ma'am.
Does not, if it results.
I pray that that satisfies the curiosity of.
Senator Fisher, you have the floor.
Thank you, ma'am. I guess the author will have to pardon my dimness on this one, but if he could state that again, if in the event that a school cannot meet the requirements of the rules and regulations, yet is in the process of making corrective actions, will that school have to close?
No. The school would not have to close unless it's a violation that would result in the closure or condemnation of a school. The intent of this really is there's a lot of rules and regs in terms of health and safety. For example, you need to have a certain shade of light bulb or window cover, or the bathroom stall door has to be a certain amount of inches above the ground. So if GDOE has initiated corrective action for these types of violations, which I'm not saying are minor, but are less serious than a violation that would result in the closure or condemnation, then the director may grant a variance, but a written statement shall include an alternate plan to address the potential hazards that variance may grant. And then they report all of these things, if you read further, to this body, Legislature and Guam, and also the Guam Education Board. And these reports are going to be filed monthly. I would also just say that the Acting Superintendent of Education has also committed to monthly check-ins with this body, whether or not this bill becomes law. The Acting Superintendent has pledged that she'll be down here giving us status reports on all of the work to bring our schools into compliance with basic health and safety guidelines. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Fisher, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and if you would allow me to thank the gentleman for his answer.
Thank you, Senator. All right, on the bill, is there anyone else who'd like to be recognized on the bill? If not, then the sponsor may close. Senator Lujan, I didn't see your hand. You may speak on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand in full support of this bill. And, you know, it's just really crazy that we're having to debate this issue because the students and the parents and the people of Guam deserve more. The status quo is definitely not acceptable. You know, I heard about closure versus not. We're just coming out of a closure based on something we have not seen, we cannot see, a virus. We see the conditions of the schools. We see the physical nature of the schools. There's a saying that says, seeing is believing. There's 5 hours of testimony on Friday of people every day who see these things. The physical nature of what's going on in the schools, falling apart. Yet the governor said deemed it's not of her authority. It's on the legislature's shoulder. Okay, here we are. It's on our shoulder. Let's work together with the governor and the school leaders. It's time to be able to get this done. Let's fix the schools now. And you know what even bothers me even more is when I think about the conditions of these schools and the 5-hour testimony and the previous roundtables that we had, and thinking that within our schools we have children that are challenged, be it physically, mentally challenged, that have to attend to our schools. And can you imagine these kids who have greater challenges than the regular challenge of the other kids? Imagine what they have to endure. Imagine what they have to endure. Especially the kids who may not be able to see or may not be able to speak. And they have to be in these conditions on a daily basis. I just want to say again that we need to act with all urgency. It's been mentioned more than once, all hands on deck. Well, the governor said it's the shoulders of the legislature. Okay, here we are addressing it. This bill will pass. Governor, you've got to sign this. And then the school leaders get going as well. Because again, the conditions in the schools, some more than others, are more deplorable than others. And this is nothing new. It's been ever since. So I ask each and every one of my colleagues again, as we get ready to vote on this bill, imagine the students who are challenged that are going to our schools. Imagine them as well. And if a regular student has great challenges and sees all these things that are going around them, imagine the ones that can't see or can't speak about it. Or even their accessibility situation has been greatly compromised. We need to fix this in totality, and we need to act with urgency. And again, I applaud the author. Thank you for allowing me to be a co-sponsor of the bill. I look forward to voting on this bill and passing it, and Governor signing it into law, and school leaders, and then for sure it'll be all hands on deck. With that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. Madam Speaker, you wanted to speak on the bill, ma'am?
Thank you very much. I rise in support of the bill. I share many of the concerns of the previous speakers, the concerns of the community, the concerns of our teachers, our principals, and most especially our parents and students. And they have voiced these to us very, very clearly. I think there should be no debate. And that the conditions of the school require immediate fixing. And when trying to come up with a solution of how do we move all of these things that we have available to us in the government of Guam to fix the schools, really my favorite part of this bill is that it does that. It says that Imagahagan Guahan may transfer personnel and other resources from, but not limited to, the Department of Public Works to assist with preparing procurement-related scope of work preparation, repairs, or other actions deemed necessary to obtain GDOE public school compliance with sanitary permit requirements. It's that all-hands-on-deck approach that the acting superintendent described that I think we are not going to get away without, that we absolutely need all hands on deck. The governor, during our State of the Island, pointed back to us, the legislature. She wants us to act. We will act, and we are trying our best to act through this emergency session and through the continued work. However, I just don't think the solution is going to be waiting for the hiring of procurement specialists at the Department of Education when we need procurement specialists today in order to spend the $120 million in ARP money that they have. And if we want to move that, we need the best and brightest of our procurement officers across our government to come to the assistance of DOE. And we have seen during the pandemic that this is what our government can do. Come to the aid of the agency, the hospital, whichever needs it the most, immediately, whichever is urgent. And bring in your engineers, your procurement specialists, your air conditioning repair persons, whatever is needed, that we can do this. We can help them so we do not have to close schools. My kids lived through closed schools, and that is not at all what we should do. But that does not mean we let them live with rat infestation. I mean, if you read the reports from public health, it's gross. And if you hear the pleas from the parents, it makes you want to cry. It's like, no, our kids should not live in that. No kids should live like that. Teachers, we tried with teacher raises to support teachers and tell them, we value you. Please don't quit on us. We value you. Yet, our conditions, and they have been so patient. And you would hear, it was a little sad during the PT.2 hearing that we had the other night that went very late. Excellent testimony. You can tell these parents in these organizations and teachers in these organizations, they have a lot of love, not just for their own children, but for all the children in those schools. And they put in a lot of time. They put in their own money, resources to really assist. They've been so forgiving, and they said, I know we don't have any money, but, you know, but really, that's not our case right now. We have money. We need to move this money. We need to move our personnel in order to address these things. The acting superintendent said that that's exactly what she's going to do, and I believe her, because I have worked with her, and she will do that if she says she's going to do it. And actually, she told us of the efforts and how they have some RFPs, I think it was, ready to go. Hopefully, she's putting those out in April. That's what she said. I just want to see if it's RFP or IFB. Anyway, she said she's prepared to put bids out in April to secure contracts for the capital improvement projects that will take place between July and September 2024 before the expiration of the funding of the ARP. In order to do that, yeah, she needed some engineers, right? We're talking about specs, and she got some. And I want to commend, for example, GPA. They came in and they helped, according to the acting superintendent. That's what she reported to us. And that's what we've seen GPA do for the hospital. We've seen them do this for GDOE, and I thank them for using their expertise to help all of the people of Guam. Section 4 of this bill also just really puts the fire under GDOE once and for all and says that they shall conduct immediate site inspections of all public schools to assess and monitor corrective action to meet compliance with these rules and regulations. The reports of those are going to be made public. The reports and the inspection and grading reports that are conducted by Public Health and Social Services are also going to be made public. And that way, everyone is going to be able to follow along and see where the resources are needed most urgently on pretty much a very regular basis. Public Health is mandated in here, despite their personnel shortage, to conduct site inspections before the issuance or renewal of sanitary permits for the school years 2023-2024. And they knew that this would be tough. They knew that many of these schools are going to have a hard time passing. They also have been working very hard to give to the schools some guidelines to help them and how to get the entire community involved. And they call it, there's like a manual that they also passed out and asked that all the schools also use it. It's called the Community Supported School Maintenance Program, which Public Health provided to assist schools with utilizing community resources to assist with improving school maintenance. And we've heard from other sources about the other types of funding that are available. And so hopefully this is the perfect storm, that we've got the money and we've got the motivation and we've had patience for all these years, but no more, and that we move our entire government to the aid of GDOE to make sure that the living conditions there are really sanitary and suitable for our most important people on Guam, that is our children. So, Sidzus Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Parkinson, do you have a point of order or point of inquiry because you already spoke earlier?
Yes, I'd like to proffer an amendment to this bill. I'd like to amend Section 2,
Senator Parkinson, you won't be able to because you already spoke. During the time you spoke, it's the only time you would be able to offer an amendment.
All right.
All right? Thank you. Any other colleague would like to speak on the bill? There being none, Senator Roy.
Mr. Speaker, can I yield 5 minutes to Senator Parkinson? Two say no over here, one says yes over there, and we'll work less for legal counsel, I guess.
Senator Roy, you can proffer the amendment that he wanted to introduce, but he already spoke, so it would end his part in speaking.
Okay, well, give me your amendment.
Okay, let's just take a
Senator.
quick 1 minute recess while you guys put it together. All right?
Okay.
1 minute recess while
minute.
you put it together.
We're back from recess. Senator Kanata, you have the floor.
I withdraw my intent to draft an amendment on behalf of Senator Parkinson. We've come to the conclusion it's not needed. But I wanted to stress my support. Zao by supporti esti na priponi gini na sa Senator Barnett. Zao na sangani todos hamdu dongklu na si Zuas Masi puna usa esti na tempo puna ajuda ifamaguan zan todo I tautau siya, no? Antes estudiante Simon Sanchez. In 2013, we challenged the senators and the governor and the mayors and leaders in our community to go to our school. And in 2013, the relativeness of all of these challenges that we see across our educational facilities has been evident. It's been there for generations. And I hope that with this legislation that we actually see some more progress versus, we need more time, we need to extend this, we need to extend that. Basically 2013 means that my class reunion is literally next year. And that is very unfortunate. Senator Perez was my teacher for permaculture. And we were both, we were trying to figure out the studies between, I guess, rodents and rats in our school. How can we work collaboratively to continue to go to school with flooding and those things not being mitigated? Between students spitting in between hallway pockets because of one student have anger management issues. Between doorknobs being broken because one child thinks that they're stronger than Hulk. So, I stress the importance for this legislation's passage. I stress the importance for our students and our nennies and to our nanas having better educational facilities. But I don't think we really needed this emergency session to address this. DOE has $183 million that hasn't been exhausted. So the whole 3 years of a pandemic, contractual work wasn't paused. Permits were still being processed. So it's not the responsibility of the doctor, speaker, Wampat, senator. She has plenty titles. But, I don't think that she's the person to blame, more or less anyone is to blame for this, because it's been generations. People who have served in this body longer than me. And that's one of the biggest reasons I stepped up to run for office, is to make sure that my school is rebuilt. It's biased or whatever, but thank you to the core chair and the leadership for giving me Simon Sanchez specifically on the build-up focus. Because my school didn't just have all those problems yesterday, it's years. And the same issue continues to be relevant in all our GovGuam facilities. It's not just DOE. But it comes down to fiscal management. Our building itself has aircon problems last year. We had like eight times our aircon was down in our building, but we're very fast to fix it. So what I'm trying to get at is preventative maintenance needs to be our goal. And funding maintenance needs to be our goal. Ensuring that those positions are kept. And people want to stay working for the government of Guam. Because why are we going to GPA to get engineer support? GPA is Guam Power Authority. GW is Guam Waterworks Authority. Not DOE's maintenance support services. And I'm hopeful that we also have some kind of financial mechanism to stress the importance of fiscal responsibility, but also that the procurement process has been very much flawed and it's caused so much delay. So that's another reason for numerous delays. We love procurement, but when procurement's causing more delays, I don't think it's as good as it once was. So, based on the severity of our schools and our classrooms, it's very imperative that we pass this legislation. And I want to thank my colleague, Senator Barnett, for having 3 kids in public school to finally get this done. Unfortunately, I don't have my own kids, but that is not my priority to have kids to proffer good legislation. Whether my child went to Father Dueñas Academy of Our Lady or whatnot, you don't need to have kids to do good by our people. And that's just not for DOE. Whether it's EPA looks like its own violation inside its building. It has black mold on the ceiling. The issues of Simon Sanchez, I went there. I didn't need a press release to go to my school. I went there. I am a halu. I am a shark. But a lot of the concerns that the reason they got a D was because of ceiling tiles. Ceiling tiles that are not flat because of the reasoning that it needed to have pinholes and cracks on it specifically for acoustic reasons. So again, updates of U.S. Department of Environmental Protection comes with it, but a lot of these things are way outdated. Our schools are in disrepair because of their aging facilities. And because we've also failed to fund the maintenance platform fairly and justly. The others, not to stress that we have a bracket of technically private funded public school facilities. Their maintenance funding, very good. But the general public school system out there, all the other schools in Mauricio, Jigo, and whatnot, that don't have specific curricular structure, aren't well funded. Our new schools, $1 million maintenance plan. So, again, I echo my support for this legislation. Thank God Chris Barnett has public school kids. And call for the vote. Thank you. Sidus Masi, have a great evening.
Sidus Masi, Senator Kanata. On the bill, if there's no one else to speak on the bill, we'll recognize a sponsor who may close on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I close, I do have a couple of motions. I would first move to this is a technical motion to add Senator Joe S. San Augustine to the list of co-sponsors. He was on the originally introduced bill, and his name would go before Senator Amanda Shelton, as was introduced.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd also like to move to add Senator Dwayne San Nicolas as a co-sponsor, and I thank him for that.
On that motion to add Senator San Nicolas as a co-sponsor, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
May I close?
You may close.
Thank you,
Oh, sorry.
Madam
Is there a... You may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you again to my colleagues for their unanimous co-sponsorship of this measure. I wanted to first start, and I said we're not trying to do anything fancy. We're trying to go for adequate, but I did want to point out some of the points listed under the adequate public education law. And of course, I'm sure you guys know this law is basically establishes the minimum standard that public schools must provide to the students. Number 6, air conditioned or properly ventilated classrooms in which the sensible air temperature is no greater than 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Fail. Number 7, potable water sufficient to provide each student a daily ration of drinking and washing water. We heard numerous testimony, sinks and bathrooms not working. Toilets not working. Some schools have one working bathroom for the entire student population. Number 7, failed. Number 8, a reliable supply of electricity. We heard testimony Friday. In the cafeteria, you plug in the fan, the light goes out. You unplug the fan, the light comes on. Fail. Proper sanitation, number 9, to include flushable toilets, clean restrooms, dining areas, and classrooms. Again, fail. Number 12, a healthful, safe, sanitary learning environment. That's a no-brainer. And I'm just surprised that we haven't had anybody sue because of our failure to meet the adequate education standards. And I believe that this bill, should it be passed into law, and I'm praying that the governor will sign it, that we come a long way in ensuring that our students, at the very least, get the adequate education that they deserve. I also wanted to address one of my colleagues' concerns about the timeline that and again, this bill, what it does is it speeds up the compliance timeline from next school year to the start of this school year. We heard testimony on this bill during the public hearing, revised testimony from the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and I'm just going to quote directly from Division of Environmental Health head Tom Nadeau's testimony. Considering the recent inspections of a handful of GDOE schools, it is evident that GDOE is not addressing the many structural and sanitation deficiencies of its schools. This suggests that active regulatory enforcement may be the only means to get GDOE to comply with the sanitation requirements. And again, ma'am, that's why we proffer this bill, to force this issue so that they can come into compliance with these rules and regulations, so that they remain open and remain able to conduct the business of educating our children. There was also some great things said about the acting superintendent, Judy Wampat, and I agree. She came down here and she told us that she had big plans, right? Big plans that I definitely appreciate. And I think in her testimony, she was trying to imply that somehow her plans, which are great, would be a meaningful substitute for my bill, and I would just respectfully disagree, because I worry about the continuity. We know the acting superintendent, as great a job as many people feel she is doing, is not the full-time permanent superintendent. In fact, her time expires in just a couple months, and then we're going to get a new superintendent. And who knows what his priorities are going to be. So that's why I, again, urge the swift passage of this bill. And this bill, it's going out to all the students in our public school system, but, most especially to the students at Ocean View Middle School who want to keep attending classes at Ocean View Middle School, but because of the many health and safety risks, they're now facing the very real possibility that they might have to go to class next school year at Southern High School. And we all know Southern High School, which is facing its own issues. Southern High School received a D rating. And so this bill also goes out to Southern High School, home of the Dolphins. I'm a son of the South. It breaks my heart that we have we had this world-class facility in Southern High School, really just decrepit now. The football field, we just got a letter from the football team. They're asking for our help to bush cut the football field. They got a world-class auditorium that, is full of pigeon crap because there's pigeons there. Mold everywhere. So, Dolphins, this is for you. George Washington Geckos, I also proffer this bill for everyone who's going over at George Washington, my alma mater, where they haven't had a gym in years, where there are classrooms that have exposed asbestos. So the students, the parents, the teachers, the staff, while the teachers and staff may have known about it, it was never released to the public. It's also going out to DL Perez, where the broken down awning is the only way for these kids to get to their classroom. And so during the rainy season, they get rained on while they're walking under an awning. We all read about the flea infestation at DL Perez, where now it's become a running joke. Do you have fleas? Simon Sanchez High School, I'm sending this out to the students, the former students, like my colleague Senator Roy, where yes, the ceiling is falling down, the toilets are broken, the rats are infesting. And just the general decrepit state of that school. And we have been like a broken record, like these calls to special session, promising the students at Sanchez that next year is their year. We've been saying that for over 10 years. It's also going out to the students and the people at Juan M. Guerrero School in Harmon, where, again, children who are in wheelchairs, those who are suffering from disabilities, have to walk through the mud and the grass when it's raining just to get to class, where they have mountains mountains of construction waste debris sitting in the middle of their campus because they hired a contractor to demolish temporary buildings, and that contractor did just that, but they piled the waste up in about 3 big mountains at that school. And they were told by Guam EPA that they can't move these piles because they need a permit. Why do they need a permit, you might ask? Well, let me answer. Because it's hazardous waste. Mountains of hazardous waste sitting in the middle of the schoolyard. And I'm tired of us just accepting this. You know, the testimony from the PTO president of Juan Guerrero said, oh, we put the caution tape. They know not to go there. I don't like that we've become comfortable with the sad reality that is the state of our public schools. Finnegodson, where they sweat because of a broken down aircon in the cafeteria that has gone unaddressed since the start of the school year. Orda Chalampago Elementary School, I was able to attend a PTO meeting there. I told them, wow, your school looks really nice. They said, Senator Barnett, our aircon has been down in the cafeteria. Price Elementary again, where the students can't perform. Because when they go to plug in something, something else dies. Because there's leaks that are running right into the outlet. FB Leon Guerrero, right? And if we shut down FB Leon Guerrero because a chunk of ceiling fell down, I just wonder why we haven't shut down more of these schools that have more egregious violations in play every single day. But again, to the students and the staff at FB Leon Guerrero who are now attending double session at Ukadu High School, meaning middle school students don't even get out of class until 6:30 in the evening. Many of these PTO representatives, parents, we even had some students testify Friday. They were surprised at how much in common all of their schools had. Many of them said, oh, I thought it was just our school that had a falling down ceiling or, you know, one working toilet for hundreds of students. Another thing that was said throughout the hearing was that they just wanted to be heard. They tried telling downtown. They get the runaround. Their requests go to DOE Central to die. And so again in this hearing, they said it's nice for us to be able to speak and to be heard and to know that we're being listened to. And that's exactly what this Bill 29 does, is we hear you. We hear you students. We hear you teachers. We hear you staff. We hear you parents, guardians. We hear you that, yes, it's always been this way, but today, I'm just so humbled that my colleagues would stand in support of this measure so that we can really and finally make the changes that our students deserve, so that next election when we say the children come first, that education is the priority, then they'll know that we really mean it. Si Dios Masi to my colleagues, and again, I'm just humbled that we would hear the concerns of the island and act on them. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you again to my colleagues. Oh, yes, stand by. I also did have another motion here. I would move to place Bill number 29-37 core as substituted and amended by the Committee on Health, Land, and Justice and Culture, and further amended, well, not on the floor, to the third reading file for voting, ma'am, if that's okay. Thank you.
That's okay. On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. All right. Colleagues, I have not received the hand-delivered, but we did receive by email another call to session, a fourth call. So I'm going to recess our emergency session again for 10 minutes to address the emergency call of the governor. So recess for 10 minutes, this is emergency session.